This video was brought to you in part by Moment. And take your legs, bring them all the way out and flat. No, on the other side, as far as you can go. Yeah, yes. Oh, Myra, your mom's not ready for this shot. This is a little edgy. Your left foot, tilt it a little bit more to the left, yes.
Don't tag me in this.
I'm gonna tag your mama in this one. I mean, god damn. Oh, yeah.
I wanna know it tonight. I wanna be the one to surprise you. Wake you up in the morning. I wanna be the one that you're calling. 'Cause I see you in the future with me. I wanna meet you. Love best friend and be family.
102 megapixels across a medium format sensor that's 70% larger than a full frame, sitting in a DSLR sized body with 6 stops of image stabilization and nearly 24 film simulations. That's the Twitter length elevator pitch that should perk up the ears of any camera nerd, but for professional photographers, a spec sheet alone isn't enough to create this overwhelming magnetism. It comes back to the feel, the overall experience of creating images. That's what I'd argue professionals value more. It's also the main reason why I took my sweet ass time with this review. I took the GFX 100S across several productions and pushed it as much as I could for my client work, projects that had real deliverables attached to them, and in that time, I've gotten to really know this camera and really how far I can stretch it. What impressed me the most was that while not perfect, there were very few compromises made with this medium format monster. As an image maker, you can really get the feeling that you can create anything with a camera like this, but there has to be some limitations, right? I mean, as much as Fujifilm will crank their marketing to make this seem like the most obvious choice for creators making a living off of photography, we're still talking about a $6,000 camera with premium lenses that mostly land north of $2,000 each. So with all of that context, let's dive in and explore how much value this camera actually brings.
But God might be on vacation, and the promised land ain't never promised. My baby telling me to be patient, but the devil always working overnight, my darling.
There's a heft to this camera that reminds me of my old Nikon D800. With the dimensions of a premium full-frame camera, this definitely steers away from what makes the Fujifilm X series so special. However, it does feel great in the hand, where your middle finger sits in a comfortable notch, allowing your index finger to trigger the shutter with ease. The grip has plenty of room for most hands to clutch onto, where the optional metal grip plate may not feel like a necessary purchase. The overall look of the camera is very clean. Strip away the logo and the profile doesn't immediately indicate who made this thing. Flip to the top and you start to see more of that Fujifilm signature, especially with that sub-LCD monitor that's always on. Similar to the GFX 100 from 2019, you can customize this to display metadata, control dials, or a histogram. Through extended use, I never found the fake dials to be particularly useful. They just felt a little difficult to discern most times. I stuck to the settings view for most of my work, and it worked perfectly fine. If you're wondering where the histogram view may be useful, my best guess would be travel and landscape photographers that are shooting, with this camera on a tripod and looking down on it. You would have also noticed by now that there aren't any retro dials on this Fujifilm camera that, made the brand really popular in the consumer imaging space. Instead, you have a PASM mode dial with 6 additional custom modes and a still movie switch. If you know me by now, you know this doesn't immediately strike that photography experience I've come to know and love from Fujifilm, especially when I'm traveling the world and just exploring my surroundings. But let's bring more of this context back. This camera is not one I'd be romantically exploring a new city with. This, for me, is a workhorse that I would be in the studio or on a specific location for a professional production with the expectation of working fast and turning over results. With that in mind, I quite enjoy this setup. You can sit in a mode you like, and the real value lies in building 6 recipes that you can rely on for most of your image making experience. I can easily go into my standard color look with specific settings, or move into a black and white mode with a higher ISO ceiling, or jump into a more nostalgic profile with added texture, or flip the movie switch and access a set of different profiles for what I'm about to capture. This mode dial complements the professional shooting environment and makes it easier to get to where you need to be faster. It might not pull those retro heartstrings, but there's no denying how much value it brings in the studio. The back of the camera has a 3.2-inch LCD display with an acceptable 2.36 million dots that is capable of tilting up, down, and to the right. This makes it quite easy to compose unique shots, especially at lower angles. The focus switch also sits on the back of the camera, unlike some modern Fujifilm X series solutions, and I think I prefer this location. You know, I can just use my right thumb to easily switch between focus modes where my left hand never has to leave the lens. You also have a healthy set of buttons that you can customize that feel dense in a good way and responsive to the camera itself. There's no D-pad on this camera. Instead, users are left with a focus stick. And well, I have some feelings about this thing, but I'll save that for a later part of this video. I'm going to talk about my issues with this camera in just a moment, but I have to give more attention to things that I've really enjoyed with this camera. Notably, the new stabilization unit. You can shoot handheld at 1/10 of a second and still get great shots. While some people may say the heft of this camera makes it easier to stabilize, you have to factor in the size of the sensor corner to corner, and that even the tiniest shift throws off the image. The addition of nostalgic negative is something I didn't know I needed in my life, but this film simulation has shot up to being, I have to say, my new second favorite, sorry, Acros is still #1 for me, but new second favorite film simulation. This look, it bumps up the saturation and does some interesting things with the reds especially, but doesn't dial up the contrast in a way that classic chrome or classic negative would. It's something that I found myself going back to a few times, and well, my only issue is that this film simulation isn't available on their X series cameras right now. I'd be shooting with this thing all day on my X100V if I could. Speaking of all day, battery life. The team at Fujifilm have blessed us by using the single battery that they introduced with the X-T4. This makes for a great user experience for anyone, like myself, who lives and works in a Fuji ecosystem. The battery itself, it's rated at 460 shots, and that seems about right. When I'm not shooting tethered, I need about 2 batteries for a 12-hour shoot day, where the second battery still has plenty of juice left in it. This is something I find myself pleasantly still surprised by because the camera still has, you know, this large stabilization unit, bigger sensor, more data being transferred and glass being moved. Yeah, the battery life is really good. Autofocus is another place that seems to have gotten a healthy upgrade from the last GFX system I've used. Face and eye detection worked reliably in well-lit environments. As the contrast dips, however, I start to see the eye detection lag, but the face detection still hold somewhat more reliably. It isn't as sticky as you'd see on something like the Sony Alpha 1, but the difference is by no means earth-shattering. Now, that was a lot of great things that I said about this camera and what I appreciate about this camera, but I think it's time for us to get a little bit more critical and discuss some items that I feel could have been better executed. When I look at an impressive camera like the GFX 100S, at some point I can't help but think how a camera like this can improve for the future beyond just throwing more megapixels. The viewfinder is one of those things where I feel like it should have shipped with a higher resolution to match, you know, the brevity that this camera brings. Deal breaker? I hardly think so. It's a matter of more matching the tone set by a product like this. The protrusion on the left side of this camera that houses the quick menu button feels a little odd at times, where it seemed like it was either too low or just too big. During extended operation, I feel like it was unnecessarily pushing against my hand. Moving on to something that I feel much stronger about, and that's the directional pad on the back that has like this disc-based joystick but operates like a traditional directional pad. it's just awkward. There were many times where I would want to bring the focus point back to the center and it would just shift directions, or vice versa. This was very poor implementation if you're asking me, and to be honest, I just wish it had been done differently. Next, as we've come to expect with Fujifilm cameras and image stabilization, they are great for photography, but the algorithm seems to work against natural movements you'd want for video. This is something I have mentioned several times before, and yet it seems like nothing has really been done to address it in a considerable way. So when it comes to video, I just find myself turning off the image stabilization entirely. And on the topic of video, this camera ships with a micro HDMI port despite its size, a port that is far too flimsy and should be excommunicated if you ask me. Moving on, it's not surprising, but I wish this camera had at least one slot for a higher speed card of some kind, be it CF Express or XQD. Also, is anyone truly angry if the secondary LCD at the top was replaced by a combined shutter speed ISO dial like the one on the X100V? I find that hard to believe, that being the case. And lastly, the GFX logo just seems out of place on the side, almost like it were an afterthought, but who knows, maybe that's just me. Now, this may seem like a lot, but this is just me thinking honestly about how the next version of this camera could be better. The truth is, if Fujifilm were to implement 3 or more of these suggestions into this camera, you're looking at a camera that's probably north of $6,000 and may significantly change how the camera is manufactured and thusly available. So while I would love to see these upgrades made, it also comes with a matter of context and trade-offs that have to have been made to make this available in the way that it is. Now, let's move on to something I find even more interesting, and that's the competition. At first glance, the Fujifilm GFX 100S looks to compete with cameras like the Canon R5 and the Sony Alpha 1. Between the three, there's so much on the table, but ultimately it comes down to what consumers value most. I mean, there's only one camera on this list that shoots north of 50 megapixels, and there's only one camera on this list that shoots over 4K without having to worry about overheating, and there's only one camera on this list that's, well, a Canon. And that might not be a strong differentiator for a platform agnostic person, but it still has some power with those that grew up with Canon being synonymous with creativity. I'll probably dedicate an entire video that looks to compare the GFX with one of these cameras, but paired against the competition, where the GFX ultimately wins out is its ability to create high resolution images with speed. The 16-bit RAW files are a huge win for those that want beautiful tonality, and being able to capture that in a relatively dynamic environment is what makes the 100S more appealing than even a Hasselblad X1D Mark II, where a camera like that brings so much visual acuity but is held back by how quickly it can perform in the field. Ultimately, there's no one clear winner in my eyes. It just comes back to what you value most for your image creation. If it weren't for this camera, I think I may actually be shooting with this X1D Mark II for my professional work. But here we are, Fujifilm has come in and made a compelling offer where for roughly $8,000, you get remarkable image resolution and fidelity that shines in the commercial world. Is it for everyone? Absolutely not. But there's no denying that the catalog has widened, which is, in the end, great for consumers. Before I continue, I have to take a minute to thank the good people at Moment who have been supporting my journey for quite some time, and even more so lately. If you don't know about them by now, well, they're the people that made those super dope lenses for your phone, then opened up a full-on camera store online, dropped tons of educational content from your favorite creators, and now are selling presets and LUTs from those creators as well to make your post-production process even easier. What is even more special is that you can hit up their gear guides, these people that are into cameras, and interact with them in real time, asking them your questions and requesting suggestions from them. Over the last few years, I've gotten to know a few people from their team, and they are incredibly passionate about the creative journey. So go ahead, visit shopmoment.com and jumpstart your creativity today. Is the Fujifilm GFX 100S a market disruptor? No, Even with the marketing noise about what this can do in video and ProRes RAW recording, the Fujifilm GFX 100S in my eyes is not a market disruptor. It is important because it marks an inflection point for the company where digital medium format photography has become significantly more accessible for professional image creators. This camera is like any camera where it's just a tool, and for people like me, a tool is as important as you need it to be. For years, I've carved out a career with a crop sensor camera, creating award-winning images around the world and meeting some phenomenal humans along the way. And at no point did I feel like I needed a medium format sensor to be better. However, as companies like Fujifilm aggressively lower the barrier to entry for technology like this, and people like myself begin to see more and more success in our journey and are lucky enough to get hands-on with this thing, well, shit, we think, what if? What if we were able to introduce a new tool that brings so much more to the table, it objectively raises the ceiling in which we practice our medium? That's what the GFX 100 is. It's a tangible example of the continued democratization of creative technology. Or in simple terms, it's just f***ing brilliant. And there you have it. There's my review of this big, crazy, formidable, robust, medium format monster that is the GFX 100S. And you know, not just creating images with this thing, I look forward to dialoguing with you guys more about this camera, this ecosystem, and what it allows me to do. So stay tuned for that. And as always, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, because I read everything. And yeah, as always, my name is Gajan. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.